Welcome back to Budget Meals That Don't Suck. We're doing round two today, and we are starting off with a Euro Greek meatball pita sandwich wrap type of thing. And this is super easy to put together. And I started this series because I was so sick of seeing budget meals that are just like plain weird and have like ramen noodle mixed with random stuff that like isn't really sustainable and something that you would want to actually feed your family on a regular basis. So that's kind of why I started this series. So if that's something that sounds good to you, stick along and I will have 4 yummy meals for you and all stuff that goes together so that you're not buying all these crazy ingredients that you'll never use again. So we're going to start off with the tzatziki sauce. So we're going to be using this yogurt a lot this week, and so it is worth it. And by the way, I am making these all with mostly organic foods, and everything comes out to like roughly $3 per person for most of these meals. I really try to keep it pretty affordable, and if you aren't into organic or it's just not something you can afford, these will be even less per portion. So I just grabbed some dill from my green stock outside. I'm growing some for the summer, but if you have just dried dill, totally fine. We'll be using dill in some other recipes this week. So if you're going to have to invest in a dill, like dried dill, you will definitely be using it up. So I also got some little mini cucumbers. I only used one for this. I would say I would probably double this and do more like 2 cups of yogurt next time and 2 cucumbers, only because we actually used a lot more of the sauce than we thought we would. It was really delicious, so we really enjoyed it on our pitas. So I would probably use about 2 cups. And by the way, I will put all of the recipes linked in the description below so that you can go ahead and download it. So don't worry about writing everything down or keeping track that way. So I'm just chopping these up into nice little cubes, and it added a really nice crunch when we put it on the pita. So I really recommend doing that versus shredding it. I think traditionally you would shred it, but I thought that the crunch was really good. And since these are like seedless, they really retain that crunch factor, whereas a normal cucumber might be a little more on like the soggy, slimy side. Now we are going to prep our pita now, and you can do this one of 2 ways. I used yeast this time, and I'm usually a big sourdough gal, but my sourdough starter just needed a little bit of love after being out of town for a whole weekend, and I didn't use it the whole week before, and it needed a little bit of revival. So I decided to use yeast, but if you want to do a sourdough pita, that is awesome and super gut healthy too. And so I am terrible at actually measuring things out. And I think that that's beneficial, honestly, because I think it just shows that you really don't need to be some scientific expert to make good food for your family. A lot of stuff has a lot of leeway into, any mistakes or anything like that. So I don't know. I'm big on just eyeballing things, and I think that's kind of good to learn to cook too. So I put a little bit of yogurt into the pita bread mixture and just a hair of honey. You could also use like a little bit of sugar or any other sweetener that you like to use and you have on hand. A little bit of salt as well, and a little bit of oil, probably about a 1/4 cup or so. And then I just kind of gave that a good mix, and I had put some water in there too. I'm going to put a little bit more water because it was a little dry, but you just kind of want to mix it until it is a little bit wet, but not too soggy, because you want to be able to roll it out later. And at this point I was like, oh, I think I added a little too much water. So I just added a little more flour, and that's how we do it. We go by our touch and our feel. And the more you cook these things, the easier it'll become. So I just need it right in the bowl, because if I can get one less thing messy, I am all about that. And so I just needed it together. And this was probably about, I don't know, I would say maybe like 30 minutes before I really started cooking. And you probably want to let it rise like 30 minutes to an hour. And if I were to do it again, I would probably make that tzatziki sauce the night before, just because the second day we ate it, it was so much more flavorful. So I highly recommend that. But I just put this to the side. let it rise a little bit, and then I went and I started on making my meatballs. So this is the organic beef that you can find right at Aldi. At my Aldi, it is just under $6 a pound, and for organic beef, it's actually a pretty good price. I don't really find it much cheaper anywhere else. And so I'm just going to put a little bit of salt on there, and then I put just a few seasonings in there, some pepper, some garlic powder, and a little bit of parsley as well. You can really keep it pretty, neutral. You don't have to do anything crazy. We're going to use this for a second meal, so we don't want to make it like too crazy on anything else flavor wise, but whatever you have in your pantry is what I would use. Like, you don't have to stick to any rules with this. And so I am just using 2 eggs here. I always generally have a rule of 1 egg per pound of meat, and that really helps with my meatball ratio, so that I have a pretty consistent mixture. And so I just put a half a cup of almond flour because that's what I had on hand. But if you have breadcrumbs, or even just if you have like regular bread that you crumble up in there, anything to start to kind of absorb some of that moisture from the eggs and the meat, that's really what your goal is. So just, again, use what you have on hand. Don't go and buy anything special. Mostly we have things that we could use. You could even grind up some oats, whatever you have on hand to make this budget friendly. Okay, so now I am just making small meatballs. So I try to make these on the smaller side. It's generally a struggle for me to like consistently make them small. I always, especially as I keep going, I start to make them bigger and bigger. But I think that these are just much better if they're on the smaller side. And you just want to pan fry these in a skillet so that they are cooked all the way through, just depending on how your liking of meatballs is. And then if you have tongs or a spatula, you can just start to turn them over as they start to get brown. And just make sure you keep an eye on them because you don't want them to get too crispy unless that is like your flavor preference. So just keep on flipping them over until they are cooked all the way through. And I had to do this in 2 batches. So it was about a pound per batch. Okay, so now we are rolling out the pita, and I'm doing this one-handed because I have baby in the other hand. You can't see her, but that's mostly how I cook most of the time, is baby in one hand and cooking in the other. And so I'm just rolling out the pita, and if you've made tortillas before, it's very similar process, but you just don't want to roll it out as thin because you want kind of that thicker pita-like consistency. So I just put it on the skillet. I have it usually around like a medium heat, and I probably cook it for like 1 to 2 minutes per side. It has to go a little bit longer than tortilla would because it is a little bit thicker. And so I just like to try and clean up as I go. It's not always doable, but if I can start to clean up as I'm cooking, it definitely makes it a little bit better when I'm done at the end of the night. But let me know in the comments if you are clean as you go or clean when you're done kind of person. I'm somewhere in between. And so once the meatballs are all done, you want to take them off of the pan. And again, you can just keep making your pita. And then once everything is done, you can take your pita, take your meatballs. I did about 3 to 4, and then I put my sauce on top. And you guys, this was so good and definitely something we're going to be making in the future. All right, so next up is going to be homemade pasta, and we're going to leverage the meatballs that we used the night before so that we don't have to make another protein. And I usually like to pair something that might take a little bit more time, like homemade pasta, with a meat that I've already cooked or something that's just really simple to put together. Sometimes we do meatless pasta too, just because it is so good by itself that we often don't feel like we need it, and it has the eggs in it, which gives us some of that protein too. So I have a whole video on how I make pasta, which I'll link below so that you can have a detailed version if you haven't made your own pasta before. But here I am just whipping this up during my lunch break because I didn't have time the night before, but usually I put a little bit of sourdough in there so that it has a little bit of time to ferment. And I just set that aside. So now it is dinner time, and I'm going to start prepping some Brussels sprouts. This was about a pound of Brussels sprouts. I really do wish I had a little bit more in there. So next time I might get like 1.5 to 2 pounds because I don't know, I can just never have enough Brussels sprouts, but it was still really good in the dish, especially if you're just trying to keep the cost a little bit lower. And you can really just use any vegetable that's in season. But I'm just quartering most of these, and I'm putting a whole stick of butter into the pan and frying them up so that they get a really nice crispy bottom. I like to use my cast iron for this because I just think that it cooks it the best, but certainly use whatever pan you have on hand. You could also throw this in the oven too while you're cooking your noodles. It'll get nice and crispy that way too. So I'm just throwing away the scraps here. I can't wait till I get home and I have my compost bin. I'm just really looking forward to being able to compost again. So I'm just grabbing some of my spices, and here I'm going to salt the water for the pasta. I'm waiting for it to get up to a boil, and I'm also going to throw some salt on those Brussels sprouts. I always just salt and pepper as I go. So here I'm going to roll out that pasta. I really love this bench scraper. It's awesome just to cut up pasta and clean up on the counter. My husband always uses it to like clean up all of the like goop that sticks to the counter while I'm cooking. So I'm just rolling this out really thin. I always like to make it pretty thin, and I don't use anything crazy special for tools, just my roller to make pasta. You don't need like any fancy machinery. I honestly find that it's a little bit faster between like taking out my pasta machine, all that. I really just prefer my roller most of the time. I have been looking at like eyeing up a KitchenAid one, but honestly, I'm just not even sure I would use it as much, but we'll see. Here, I'm just using a pizza cutter to cut up the pasta. Again, you just like don't need crazy tools. I just feel like sometimes we're sold like just way too many tools and stuff. And here I am just going to throw the pasta in the water. And I cook it for about like 2 to 3 minutes. And here we are almost done with cooking the Brussels sprouts. I had it pretty well timed, I have to say, between the Brussels sprouts being done and the pasta being done. And I just put the pasta directly into the Brussels sprout pan. And I just kind of moved it about so that the noodles got coated in that butter. And I did end up going back and adding a little bit more butter to the pan. I think I did either half a stick or a whole stick. I think it ended up being two sticks of butter. In my house, you can never have too much butter. And we are just chopping up some garlic here. My best tip for garlic is to add it towards the end of when your meal is done. That way it won't get burnt and kind of that weird, like bitter, burnt garlic taste. Okay, so this is just me putting in the aforementioned butter, and I'm just mixing everything up so it can get nice and melty and yummy. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab those meatballs from the fridge from the night before. You can see all the flour on my butt, you guys. I am a messy cook, and look at my messy fridge. It just gets so hard sometimes being a mom of two and under to just have everything organized. So just remember to give yourself some grace here. So we're just tossing in the meatballs and just getting everything nice and warm. Get the butter melted. And when I'm telling you that this is a family favorite, like it totally is. My son was eating a little treat of ice cream before here because he had actually eaten not too long before I finished dinner. He ate some rice, and so we let him have some ice cream, and he gave up his ice cream to eat noodles because he loves this stuff so much. I threw on some parsley that I had grabbed from my green stock outside, but if you have dried parsley, that will work just as good. And I'm telling you guys, this is just one of our family favorites, noodles. I mean, you can't go wrong. And it's honestly, if you just make fresh pasta, even with just like butter, garlic, super simple, it is so good. And you just can't do much better than that, honestly. So I'm just putting this away so that we can eat it for lunch and dinner and any other day of the week that we need food. I always try to make extras of everything so that I can cook once and eat twice. Usually I work from home. My husband comes home from lunch and we eat leftovers a lot of the time. So I just like to have all of those extras laying around. So it is going to be the next day, and we are going to start off with some chicken tenders and French fries. Now, I showed you guys this French fry tip in my last video, And I'm working on perfecting it even more. And I learned a few things doing it this time. So I made these the day of, and I will say, I think it is better to let it sit overnight. I didn't have time the night before, so they still turned out great. And I'm like, they're definitely still really good. But here's some tips that I definitely learned. So if you can, do it overnight, 24 hours of sitting, and let it sit in the fridge, get nice and cold. I let it sit on the counter, and I think that was honestly one of the biggest things that made a difference is that when they were cold, French fries going right into the hot oil, that was a huge thing to make it really nice and crispy. Don't be afraid to go heavy on both the salt and the vinegar. I think I put even less than I did last time, and I could definitely taste the difference. I think that a heavy amount of vinegar was truly one of the biggest things from a flavor perspective last time. So definitely don't be afraid to go heavy on either of those. So mix that in and let it sit together. And then now I am just prepping the chicken. So I did this at lunchtime. You could totally do it the night before. I just cut them into like 3 to 4 pieces depending on the chicken size. And I wasn't really concerned about making them like too even. I tried to make them about the same, but if they're not like the same size, it's going to be okay. And so I just cut those up and then I put them into a bowl. And make sure you trim off some of like that extra fat just so they don't have like weird stringy parts when you're cooking your chicken tenders. And the one thing I like about organic chicken is that I feel like it fries up better. I've used both, and because a lot of times they are packed a little bit differently, like water based versus like air packed. It definitely is a little bit better. So once you've cut up all of your chicken, you want to take your yogurt, maybe about a cup or so, and put it into your bowl, and then another cup or so of milk in there. You don't really need to be precise, but you want to just make sure that all of your chicken is well coated. I put a little bit of salt in there and then some seasonings as well. I put a little bit of some ancho chili or chipotle chili powder that I had just to give it a little bit of kick. You could use cayenne if that's what you have. I didn't have any on hand, so I just wanted a little bit of spice in there, and then I put some garlic powder, and usually I would put like a little bit of paprika in there too, but I am out, which is crazy because I use it in everything. So you just want to mix up all of your seasonings in there and give it like all nicely coated, and then you want to go ahead and cover it and put it in the fridge. So now we're gonna go and get our mixture ready for the coating, and we're going to take flour and eggs and use that to kind of bread it for everything. And I just put a little bit of garlic powder, parsley, salt and pepper into my flour mixture just to give it a little bit of seasoning. I put a little bit of taco seasoning in place of what I would usually use paprika, which has kind of all of those similar flavors that I would want. It's not going to really make a huge difference on the flavor. Like, you're not going to taste those individual things, but it does give it an overall good flavor. So I put in 2 eggs and then I mix it up really well. And then we're going to go ahead and take our chicken out of the fridge. So this is what it looks like. And then we're going to first take one hand and we're going to dip that one hand in the egg mixture. That's our wet hand. And then we're going to have a dry hand, which is going to handle all of the flour mixture. So I usually try to like dip one on each side and then have my dry hand come in and really pat down all of that flour mixture onto the chicken. And you really want to push it. Don't be like gentle here. You really want to really push that flour in so that it's nice and coated. And then in a heated oil pot, you can go ahead and put the chicken in there. I was able to fit about 3 in each, and you want it at 350 degrees. Now, I don't have a thermometer for my oil here, so I just kind of go based on like how it looks, and it usually works out pretty well for me. And you can see how juicy the chicken looks here. I did about 5 minutes for each batch of chicken, and that seemed to work out pretty well. Obviously, you want it cooked, to like 165 degrees until the chicken is cooked through, but usually about 5 minutes is a pretty good estimate. So I am whipping up some ranch for our chicken tenders and fries. I really love homemade ranch. I have just not been able to find a store-bought brand that I love, and I find that it's just really easy to whip up ranch. We don't eat it every night, so going to the store and buying the store-bought stuff for like $5-6 a pop just doesn't make sense for us when we can just make it when we need it. So I took the fries out and I just patted them down with some paper towel to get them nice and dry before we're putting them into the hot oil. Now, I think next time I might switch out the oil a little bit after frying the chicken. It just seemed to get a little bit darker than I would have normally liked to make the fries, but they still turned out really good. And just a reminder, if you're not doing like a ton of frying in one day, you can actually save your oil to reuse later. It just really depends on how hot you have it and what you're frying it in. But if you strain it off and make sure that you don't have any bits in there, you can actually reuse it in the future. It will get darker generally, but it really just depends like what you're frying it in. So make sure that you are salting the fries as soon as they get out of the fryer. That's going to be your crucial time to get salt on those fries. And this was the end result. I loved it, and I dipped it in a heck of a lot of ranch because I am from the Midwest, and you know that we are eating ranch with our chicken and our fries. So the next day is we are going to eat up the leftover chicken tenders because we made a lot of them. And we are going to make some tortillas really quick. The great thing about tortillas is that you don't always have to make them too far in advance. I make sourdough ones, so I do make them a couple hours in advance so they can ferment a little bit, but you don't have to. You can totally skip the sourdough step and make them about 30 minutes before you want to eat them, just so that they have enough time for the gluten to rest. But it is mixed up very similar to the pita, but no yeast there. And I just mix it in the bowl just like the pita and let it rest there. And then we are going to roll them out. So I put a little bit of flour on the cutting board, make a small disc, kind of push it down, and then I use the rolling pin to roll it out. And you want to make them pretty thin. You're gonna have to flip it over quite a few times, and it'll be like almost see-through, but not quite, and that'll be a very good thinness for your tortilla. If you like it a little thicker, you don't have to roll it out as thin, but then you're gonna put it onto a medium skillet and cook it for about 30 seconds to a minute on each side. You just want to watch it, and I usually kind of move it around with my hands. Sometimes with a burner that's not gas, you tend to have to move it around because it's not always the most even heat on a skillet, but it does cook up quite quickly. Now, this is totally optional. I just cooked up this bacon because I had it in my fridge and it was going to go bad soon. And my husband suggested putting it into our chicken wraps. So I just did that. And I wanted to show you guys this really cool bacon grease collector that I have. It is really nice. It has that nice filter on it. And then I just take all of my bacon grease that I cook my bacon in the oven. It's the easiest way. I highly recommend it. But I just drain it right in here, and I keep my bacon grease on the counter, and I use it for a lot of cooking if I need something like with really good flavor, and it just makes sure that your stuff does not go to waste. So I will put a link to my Amazon storefront in the description below, and I have it linked there. It is really awesome. Highly recommend it. So I am just putting in those leftover chicken tenders and fries in the oven to kind of heat up. If you have a broiler, I recommend using that. Ours, unfortunately, in this rental is broken, but it worked nonetheless. So there's the leftover ranch. I'm putting it on the tortilla. I got a little bit of iceberg lettuce and I put that on there because I like a little bit of a crunch in my wrap. I broke up a piece of bacon and I cut up the chicken into kind of like bigger chunks, but I thought about doing the whole chicken strip, but I just figured it'd be a little bit easier to eat it if it was cut up a little bit. And then I rolled it up like a Chipotle burrito. And you guys, these were really, really good and easy way to use up our leftovers and not really have to do a ton of cooking that night. So if this is something that you love, please take a look at the rest of my channel. I have lots of similar videos to this. I will add my playlist to all of my made from scratch cooking videos. And if you have a favorite budget meal, please share it in the comment below so that we can make it as well. And thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time.